Hi, everyone. We're here. We're live. Batya is here. I'm really excited. Um, I have to always remind myself to tell everyone watching to like and subscribe so that I'm not erased from the algorithm. I'm not YouTube's favorite, so so I always need a little bit of assistance. And I hope that people who want to participate in the live chat will, if you do want to ask a question, if you can use the super chat, that would be helpful in terms of my ability to see it, because I'll try to keep an eye on the live chat, of course, but I can't pay that close attention to because I also have to pay attention to what we're talking about. And yeah, thanks for joining us, Batya. Oh, I lost your sound. We had you before, and now we don't have you. Oh, there you are.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here with you. And I also have questions for you, actually.
That's what you did last time I talked to you. Like, actually, can I ask you some stuff?
Well, actually, okay, just something quick that I'm
Okay.
dying to know. What has your experience of Twitter been since you were brought back? And do you think that yeah, like how is it different than before you were booted?
I find it different in terms of the fact that I'm not afraid to speak freely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, it probably appeared as though I was doing a lot of free speaking prior to my being banned, but I was actually trying to be a little bit careful here and there. But I mean, I don't know, and I've always really liked Twitter. Like, I was never one of those people who was like, "This hellscape." Like like, I wasn't like I mean, obviously, like, as I'm sure you know, like, if you're doing media or writing or journalism, you do feel sort of obligated to participate in social media to promote your work and remain sort of visible and keep up with what's going on, but I never felt it was a burden at all, and for the most part, I mean, obviously, it sucks if you're getting piled on, but I don't it's not that hard to just log off, you know what I mean?
I do know
So,
what you mean.
yeah, like, I'm stoked at the new Twitter. I feel like people in general seem more free. I really enjoyed watching the blue check meltdown. That was a good time. Like, the normies get a check now too.
I know, right?
And those, like, kind of elite media people trying to I don't know, trying to play it off as though it was pathetic for people to be paying $8 a month for Twitter, when in fact I feel like it makes total sense, and I feel like it's worth it in terms of what you get from that $8. What do you think? I mean, you weren't banned for 4 years. Have you noticed like a big change since Elon took over?
I actually have, but I'm still sort of processing what exactly it is. Like, I'm not quite sure because on the one hand, I totally agree with you. Like, it was so great to see the meltdown. It was democratizing to be
Yeah.
like, it's just $8. Like, is this worth it to you or not? But on the other hand, I do experience. I think that he sort of did break it. Like, I don't know why, but it's totally useless to me now. And I'm
Really?
trying to figure, yeah,
Huh.
like first of all, I've been shadow banned since he took over. I think because
Really?
yeah, and I think it's because I've tweeted about him being like in China's pocket, but I've never gotten
Oh,
any since he took over. I have had zero engagement. I have quite a lot of followers, and he also, this is going to come up later in our conversation about the media. He's downgraded any tweet that has a link in it. So if you post an article you've written, that will get like not shadow banned, but it will be totally downgraded because he doesn't want people leaving the app to go read
okay.
this article. So in that sense, it's made it like completely useless to journalists who used to use it basically as a way of sharing their work.
Right.
So if you share an article now, like no one will see that tweet. So from that point of view, and I'm hearing this from journalists across the political spectrum, like so it's become, and also like I was thinking about this the other day. The way I came up was I would write an article or post something on Twitter, and I would get like totally dogpiled by the right on one day and by the left the next day, sometimes for the same article by both the left and the right. And it
That means you're
was,
doing it right.
well, yeah, but it was like I didn't really have the stomach for it. I don't have that personality where I love that. I hated it. It was really, really depressing, but it also made me quite prominent in this tiny little sphere. And that I think got me to the job that I have now. And that's people can't come up that way anymore because he broke it. Like, so all of the leftist journalists who are clout chasing have left. Which is great. They sucked, but they also they provided a very useful service because you could see the discourse and where it was going. You could see how they were enforcing their crappy values. So like having that on display and having them do their, be their insecure but preposterously egotistical selves, in public, in a mass forum, it was very useful. And now that's sort of gone. But I think obviously America is going to be much better for it because it was terrible for the country. But I think I think Elon Musk has realized this, and that's why he's trying to pivot now very quickly to AI. I think he realizes he made a huge mistake. But I think the reason he did it was because he thought everybody, I mean, he's a billionaire. He doesn't know any normies. He doesn't know that regular people just don't use Twitter. It's like they would never use Twitter. And so it's like where the elites would go to police other elites. And he had this idea that, he could get it from, only 20% of Americans are on Twitter, and they're like, it's like elites. And he thought he could get everybody on it, but it's like, that's not what it was for. And so he broke it. But I think that that's actually going to be like, good in the long run. But it's just such an interesting, it's a very interesting moment. And as you could tell, I haven't quite figured out what I'm feeling about it.
Right. Okay. That's a really interesting perspective because I have been getting a lot of engagement more over the past like 2 months or something. Like early on, not so much. I think maybe I've figured out how to use it in a more effective way in terms of how the algorithms shifted. Like obviously it's things like if you embed video, he likes that. And
people stay on to watch it.
Yeah. Like it's like obviously I noticed like if you put like a YouTube link up, it doesn't go anywhere. Obviously if you put the Substack Twitter war, I really don't like. I don't see why Elon would see Substack as a threat to him because I think that they're completely different mediums and platforms. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you understand that. Does that make sense to you, or do you think that it's like pretty irrational?
I think it's very rational because he decided they were a competitor and taking traffic. Basically what happened was people with huge Substacks would post links on Twitter and then all of their followers would go read their. That's actually good for Elon Musk, but he didn't see that. Like he doesn't really understand media. He doesn't understand what what free speech is or what the First Amendment is. He's caught between three sort of competing sets of needs, I think. Like on the one hand is his need to be in the news every single day. That need for attention, that Trumpy need for attention, which I get that, it's like, I understand that. But that, and then he has this sort of, the need, that free speech commitment that he, whether you believe him or not, he's sort of stated that free speech commitment. And then he has the need to turn a profit. And like, you can't turn a profit on an app that uses the First Amendment as its guideline because nobody's going to advertise on an app that has swastikas on it, as he learned very quickly after taking over. So he, immediately backtracked on that whole free speech, First Amendment thing, banned Kanye for posting a swastika, and then started banning journalists at the behest of autocratic regimes like India, and listened to China when they said stop tweeting about the lab leak theory. So he's I think that he didn't quite understand what he was getting into, and is sort of coming up against a lot of the same stuff the old Twitter regime had. And
yeah, I mean, it obviously seems like he's trying to figure out how to do it. Like he's trying different things. I mean, I sort of feel like, Twitter is really important. Like it was always annoying and frustrating to me when people claimed that, like, oh, it's just Twitter. Who cares? It's not real life. And it isn't real life. But at the same time, it's hugely influential, as we both know, in terms of politics and media and who had a voice and who didn't have a voice, and in terms of what information could be shared and what kind of conversations could be happening happening, and even what was deemed hate speech. So it is hugely important, but at the same time, I mean, I think that it's important for people to have a relationship with it where they do kind of take it with a grain of salt. And I mean, one of the things that I learned from being banned from Twitter is to not rely so heavily on Twitter. You know, I do most of my engaging there because I like it better than a lot of platforms, but I also learned, unfortunately, because this is time consuming, that you really have to spread out. And you know, I do really appreciate, and say it as much as I can and promote it as much as I can, Substack, because it seems to me that those guys genuinely are invested in free speech, and I think that they're doing a lot of really cool stuff with that platform. So I mean, do you see Twitter shifting into something completely different or going away? Like, what do you see the model of social media and media in general? Where do you see that going? Like, do you see it is it all gonna be on platforms like Substack, where it's like people can write long form, but they can also embed video, and they can also use it to publish their podcasts, and they can also use it for social media via notes and all that stuff?
I'm very bad at prognosticating. I'm always wrong, and I don't have that predictive ability.
I try never to predict anything because I'm always wrong.
Basically, I'm always wrong about everything when I try to predict, but I can analyze. You know, I think I'm good at like analyzing. So, for example, all right. So we want to talk about big media. So the context for what is happening, I think, specifically, let's start with like Vice and Buzzfeed.
Right. Okay. So for anyone who hasn't followed along, Vice is going to declare bankruptcy soon. It is looking like. Buzzfeed is done. I think, you know, like a whole bunch of other
news. Yeah. So
BuzzFeed News.
Yeah.
Okay.
BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed, the website, is going to keep producing listicles. Many of them are now being generated by ChatGPT and AI, right? Because you could, you know, they're sort of, but the news site, BuzzFeed had a news site, and that news site has closed down. So a lot of these sites that had, like, you know, $250 billion valuations, you know, 10 years ago, such that they would turn down being sold to Disney. Disney tried to buy BuzzFeed, and they turned them down because they thought they were worth more than that. You know, stuff like that. They're now just collapsing. A lot of this, like, social media, a lot of this media, digital media landscape, and social media has played a big role in that. So the way that I see that, it's that there were sort of two main contributing factors to that collapse. The first is like 100% social media. So after 2016, anybody who could be blamed in any way for the election of Donald Trump was blamed. And that was considered to be this like cardinal epic sin by the liberal and leftist elites in the media. So Facebook, which was seen as, you know, this, you know, great criminal, because it allowed people to post, real people to post that they actually like this guy and we're going to show up and vote for him because he made them feel seen. Facebook was considered now this like massive criminal in the like liberal leftist elitist sphere. And so they decided that to countermand that, they were going to stop promoting posts that had news links to them. They're like, we're out of the news business. And they're going to start elevating posts by friends and family that were non-political. They then said, no, but you can post political videos. So like all the digital media companies were like, okay, video, we're all going to pivot to video. Everyone starts pivoting to video to chase that Facebook traffic. And then Facebook's like, no, only live video. And they're like, okay, now we're going to do live video. And like, you can really see every time Facebook changed the algorithm, all of the social media all the media companies that relied on that traffic, these digital media companies, they would sort of race to, you know, chase and catch up and try to get that traffic. But they were always one step behind and too slow. You know, so Facebook kept changing the algorithm. And meanwhile, Facebook became very unpopular among those people that media companies were catering to. People started switching to Instagram, which of course doesn't allow you to post any links, and TikTok, which has no links at all, right? And TikTok, the algorithm doesn't even show you friends and like you don't follow anyone. It's an algorithm that tells you what to follow. So in other words, it's the Chinese government telling you what to see. So
I refuse to get on TikTok. I still won't use it. I have zero interest.
It's just, It's the worst.
Yeah.
Literally teenagers who like watch one video about being sad because they're sad get told watch video after video after video because of this Chinese government algorithm telling them to kill themselves, and then they do. It's like the most horrific,
Yeah.
insane thing you've ever heard. So the social media component of how these media companies were getting their money, because the reason that they relied so heavily on social media was because digital ads just never paid as much as print ads, and so they couldn't rely on ad revenue anymore. These digital media companies, they had to get their revenue in another way, and the way they did that was through engagement. Basically, the longer people stayed on their page, the more data they could mine, and then they could sell that data. And how do you get engagement? You get engagement when people share your stuff on social media and click on it and comment on it and like it. So the way that they made money was completely tied to social media companies. And as the social media companies moved away from people sharing links to news sites, all of those media companies sort of started losing revenue. But I think that the social media story is only one piece of the puzzle. There's also a second piece of the puzzle, which is the thing that I harp on a lot, which is the role that the class divide plays in this. So BuzzFeed was Jonah Peretti, the guy who started BuzzFeed. He would call it jokingly the bored at work network. It was basically like created for people, for like over credentialed college graduates they had office jobs, like white collar jobs, where they would sit behind a computer and their job takes them. We know this now from these like TikTok videos that people post who worked at Google or worked at Facebook or worked at any of these, like,
and didn't have enough work to do because
they didn't
obviously
have
they had
any
a lot
work.
of time for TikTok
Exactly.
videos.
So it was like their job would take them an hour and a half, and they would have to spend a lot of time sitting at that computer and looking busy, right? The
Yeah.
bored at work network. That's who BuzzFeed was for. That's who these listicles of 29 cats who are having a worse day than you were created for, is people who are stuck in front of a computer and they have to look busy because their job is like not a real job, but it was been inflated by the knowledge industry. And guess what? After the pandemic, those people don't go to the office anymore. They work from home. So they're not commuting. They're not standing on the, in a subway or sitting in an Uber, and they're working from home. So they work for 2 hours and then they go and bake banana bread and go to yoga. And there's just no longer that like need to sit there looking busy anymore, because the entire economy of the knowledge industry has like totally changed. And the elite taste at the same time, I think, moved away from Facebook and moved away from like viral accessible stuff. What they're doing now is moving to Substack. They're subscribing to newsletters that are written by like wonky people who have, data at their finger. They're going back to that model of like the blogs from the 2010s.
Yeah.
And they're subscribing to the New York Times so they can play Wordle and get those recipes and feel like a good citizen in good standing, right? So that's kind of, that elite consolidation away from mass media and back towards elite niche media that's created to make you feel smart and pretends to be like objective data when actually it's just like smug liberal leftist elite values. That's happening on the one hand. And on the other hand, someone like Ben Shapiro is still getting tons and tons and tons of traffic from Facebook. I mean, if you look at the top 10 Facebook posts every day, 7 of them are Ben Shapiro, because the people who watch, the working class people who are not part of that leftist elite, they like to consume longer videos, longer podcasts, stuff that you can get on YouTube, stuff that you can get on Spotify, that occupies your mind when you work with your hands. I mean, it's just a totally different. On the one end, you have BuzzFeed, people who are staring at a computer all day and need something to look at to pass the time. On the other end, you have people who are truck drivers, or welders, or mechanics who need something to listen to while their hands are occupied doing their jobs. And these people tend to like longer form podcasts. And what they like, especially I've noticed, is like what's doing really well is stuff that's opinionated, but it's not Republican, it's not Democrat. It's sort of independent. But the problem with that is that YouTube, and I'm sure you've noticed this, the YouTube audience and the YouTube algorithm is extremely demanding, and it's very unforgiving, and it pushes you in a certain way. Like it pushes you to get more and more extreme and to really dig down and double down. And if you sort of say something they don't like, there's a really big pushback. I mean, you pay a really heavy price. You know, content creators on YouTube, they know exactly what their audience wants. And there's a lot of pressure, I think, to deliver it and keep delivering it and keep delivering that and getting more and more extreme. So that, you know, they're independent in the sense that they are not dependent on corporate media, and they don't really belong, I would say, to either party, but they are very, very tied to exactly what they think or have decided the algorithm and the audience wants from them. And I think that's going to start to be a real problem long term and down the road, because, you know, audiences both want what they want, but they also don't want to be insulted. And there's a big push there to give really to cater to the people who post comments specifically. And also, of course, YouTube is extremely censorious on certain topics when it comes to trans issues, COVID stuff. Like, you get booted off YouTube very quickly. So that's going to end up being, I think, a big problem. Then you have people like Rumble stepping in. And I'll just say one more thing, which is that, you know, when it comes to like BuzzFeed and Vice, they were created for a mass media market, but then created by people who are very tapped into the woke culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just not going to fly. I mean, you know, only 17% of Americans, for example, think that trans athletes should be allowed to compete on the sport of the gender they identify with. So only 17% of Americans think that, you know, Leah Thomas should be allowed to compete on a girls' team. Now, you wouldn't know that from reading any of the mainstream liberal media, because 100% of their writers and 100% of their columnists and 96% of journalists are liberals and leftists, believe what that 17% believe. And 100% of the Democratic Party thinks that Leah Thomas belongs on a girls' team. But they are a total niche. I mean, that's not where the mainstream Democratic voter is. And so when you have all of your media, you know, there's no BuzzFeed quiz that says, which gender are you? And there's only two options, right? I mean, like, that's the point I'm trying to make, right? Even though that is the view of like the majority of Americans. So I think at some point people are not going to consume media that insults them and insults their values, especially when they know that everybody they know agrees with them, but people are afraid to say it.
Right. And I guess now that like links, I mean, you're right. I'm so glad that I have you here, because I do not know nearly as much I don't know as much about this stuff in general, but I don't know as much as you do about the algorithm. Like, I mean, first of all, like, I've sort of had to, like, I've given up on the YouTube algorithm. Like, I'm not trying to, because I never really get anywhere with YouTube, and they demonetize me all the time, and they're censorial. So I mean, obviously I put my stuff up there and I use it as best I can, but I don't rely on it for income in any way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've tried to move towards, which seems like the best option, but maybe this is just for independents. I don't know if this applies to big media, but I've tried to move towards a subscriber model, because to me, the best way to connect with your audience, it seems now, seeing as you can't rely on social media because it's changing its mind all the time about what you're supposed to be doing there. And I can't keep up, that's for sure. And it obviously depends on who's in charge, is to connect directly through email. Right? Like, do you think that it's like with things like BuzzFeed and with Vice, and with all sorts of other media companies, there was a long time where they were kind of relying on what's called clickbait, right? Because they were relying on advertising revenue. So they wanted to put up any headline, any link that people were just going to click on. And that's obviously not what's going on now in terms of how people are getting traffic. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think we're moving back to a subscription-based model, which is what you're describing, you know, like things like Patreon or Rumble, where people really have like a direct, you know, or newsletters, you know, or Substack, where people are able to sort of have that direct relationship with their audience. The thing that's worrisome about that is like how much can you afford to offend, you know, upset, or, you know, like, could you at some point, when your income relies on, you know, your subscriber base, that's really good. But it's also like what you've seen with the New York Times, where they're totally terrified of offending their subscriber base, who are like, you know, over-credentialed white progressives who have a lot of money and live on the Upper West Side, and are super, super woke. And so what we've seen at the New York Times from 2011 until definitely 2021, those 10 years, what you've seen is the dangers of a subscription-based model, because what you end up doing is like catering to them in a very extreme way. And on the one hand, for opinion people, it's not as bad, because like, people come to us because they like our opinions. They want to hear our opinions. I definitely have people who write to me and say, I disagree with everything you say, but I really love to hear your take. But, on the other hand, when you're doing news reporting, you end up with a situation like the New York Times, where like they've just like 91% of their readers now are Democrat. It's probably higher than that, actually. That was the last survey, which was like, it's like 4 years old. So I'm sure the number's higher now. That's a disaster. I mean, for the New York Times, the readers aren't wrong about that, but on the other hand, where did those people go? Did they go somewhere where they're like, willing to hear other points of view? I've come to the decision. I think people's ideal form of news consumption is they don't want something where they never are exposed to the other side. Like they think that that's like lame. They want to know what the other side thinks, like most people. But they also want to get their news from people who they think share their values. So what they like, their ideal like experience of consuming news, I think, is like to have somebody who agrees with them, and then to have like a foil, like to have that person have someone on who disagrees with them but who loses. Like, because they want to feel like, okay, I know what the other side thinks, because if I don't know what they think, I'm going to get dumb and lazy, but like they want their person to win. So it's sort of like WWE in a way, like they want that experience of like, oh, I saw a good fight, but my person won.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess like I'm thinking about the kinds of media that I consume, although I don't know that my choices in terms of media consumption would line up with what the general public is doing because of my work. But, I listen to Megyn Kelly a lot because I think she's smart. And because she covers like a wide variety of different issues. I feel like she has like a perspective on a wide variety of different stuff. I find her trustworthy, but she obviously has like an angle, and she has politics, and she has an opinion. And while I don't totally align with her on everything, there is a lot that I do align with. But I mean, she's a good example because she did go independent, right? She left Fox News, and now she's doing this podcast, and she's doing really, really well.
Great. She's great. And but my husband complains about her because he says she's always talking about debate, and we have to be able to hear other sides. But when is the last time you saw her have someone on who she doesn't agree with? So he's sort of like
I think she had somebody on from MSNBC the other day, but she was really mad about it. But yeah, I mean, most of the time she has people on to have I think they were talking about the Tucker issue, and she had a couple of people on, and I can't remember their names. I apologize, but it was somebody who was disagreeable in terms of what her view on that whole situation was. But for the most part, she does have people on who agree with and back up what she sees and how she sees things.
And so that's, I feel like I love her. She's great. She's had me on. She's having really important conversations. And I'm sure if I said something she didn't agree with, like she would be like, oh, that's interesting. Here's how I see it. Like she would not have me back, but the only people I see making a concerted effort to have a debate panel is on Fox News. I mean, you just don't see that on CNN or MSNBC. And Fox has it, Harris Faulkner will have her power panel, and the liberal always loses. Okay. It's always 2 against 1, but they have their say. I mean, they're on the channel and they're having their say, also the 5, which is very funny because it's 4 conservatives and 1 liberal who's like, they're really valiant. I mean, it's Jessica Tarlov and Henry Ford Jr., and they're both wonderful. And I think that is the most important job in the media today, because they are really giving those viewers like a real opinion of what a progressive or a leftist or Democrat sounds like today. And like, yeah, it's 4 against 1, but they do a really good job. And that is the most popular show on Fox.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would enjoy that even if I was the only liberal, which
me too. I know. I definitely want that job if it's not clear.
I think it's great. I think I would be a great fit. Not me, you. I mean, Okay, so then
Or
speaking
like,
of
I'll just give you one more example. Okay,
yeah,
I can't
yeah.
get booked on a liberal show to save my life, but Fox
No.
Business, which is supposed to be like, this, free market, like, business, libertarian, what have you, they'll have me on knowing I'm a populist because they want my view of what the working class would say about this. Like, they
Right.
want to, like, and that is really, I say stuff on that channel all the time that the host is like, well, that's an opinion. You can't even get away with agreeing with liberals and leftists if you're not agreeing with them in the way they want to hear it. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's
I
so
mean,
ridiculous.
I skipped right past liberal media for the most part. That I was never, I mean, I used to be able to get on like CNN and in Canada, like the CBC and things like that a little bit, and then not at all once I started talking about the trans stuff. But I mean, that's been the thing about Fox News for so long, that leftists and liberals have actually, leftists and liberals with integrity have appreciated openly about Fox. Like, well, they'll have me on to talk about
Right.
my opinions, even though they don't agree with me at all. Glenn Greenwald, Aaron
Yes.
Mate,
Yeah.
all of those kinds of people. I guess
Although they did just fire Tucker for having the wrong opinion on Ukraine. So
Oh, is that okay? That was exactly the question I was going to ask you,
Oh,
except
sorry. Go
without
ahead.
the Ukraine thing. But I mean, I was going to say, what happened with Tucker? I mean,
Right.
so many people have so many different theories,
Right.
including like political stuff, but also, then he was a sexist, which is clearly bullshit. I'm so sure Fox would fire him for being a sexist, and he didn't really say anything that was sexist as far as I can tell. Anyway, but you think that it's political.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, today I was thinking to myself, I was like, I shouldn't say this, still going to get fired, but I was going to be like, no woman. So one of, for the audience, like some Fox, probably somebody leaked a video of Tucker calling a woman yummy, and now everybody on the left is acting like that was this act of great misogyny. But I was thinking to myself, like, no woman minds being called yummy. What they mind is another woman being called yummy, right?
It's clearly a compliment.
My
It
most
wasn't
controversial
rude.
take, right? But no, all of this stuff is
But
being
he was
anything.
joking, I
He was,
think.
first of
Like,
all, he was totally
yeah,
joking, and second of all of the stuff you're seeing that's being leaked that's meant to like character assassinate him, you can be sure that's not the real reason he was fired, right? Like,
of course.
nobody's going to leak the real reason. And I think to me the most compelling explanation that I've seen is not any of the gossip. It's that Lachlan and Rupert Murdoch each individually had a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of the Ukraine, in the last month over the course of March, and in which, look, Tucker has been the only voice that has in any way questioned our insane commitment to fighting this war against Russia in Ukraine, this proxy war. He's the only voice in the mainstream that has questioned that at all, and he's questioned it in a big way and consistently. And let me tell you something, as someone who's reporting a book on the working class, who spends, a lot of time interviewing working class Americans, they don't understand what we're doing fighting this proxy war. They don't understand why we're paying for this. They don't understand why we're prolonging this war instead of putting an end to it. So, Tucker was the only voice questioning this. And over March, we know that, the owner of Fox met with the president of the Ukraine, who I'm sure is not happy at all with anything that Tucker is saying, because he's been very critical of Zelensky as well. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, that seems to me to be like the most compelling explanation. It was just like he couldn't stand being the only voice. And what's so amazing about that, Megan, is like, where is the anti-war left? There's no anti-war left in America. We have an anti-war right. Like, the only person in Congress who is serious about putting an end to this war is Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, how did that happen? Like, how did the left become the side cheerleading the war and the right become the side being like, wait a minute, why are we paying for this? And, Tucker really was the America First voice in the mainstream. And I really don't know who could possibly replace him. It just seems like they must be moving away from that. He was brought in to speak for the Trump voter. I mean, he was brought in to speak for working class Americans, and he did a very good job at that.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like such a crazy, crazy decision for Fox to make, because Tucker is by far the most popular on the network, but he's also like one of the most popular by far in America. And And
Yeah,
I've
he was
grown
the
to
most
really like him.
popular. He's great, and he was
Like,
the most popular show among not just Republicans but also Democrats. And I see someone put in the chat he got fired because he cost Fox $700 million. Fox Tucker was the one person named in the Dominion lawsuit who did a whole segment on how crazy Sidney Powell was. I mean, he did a whole segment on how he keeps asking her for evidence that the Dominion machines actually faltered, and she never gave it to him. So he did a whole there's like a 5-minute clip, you can find it very easily, where he said, I keep asking her for the evidence and she has not brought it for me. So they really didn't have anything on him when it came to Dominion. They were just using this as an excuse to embarrass him and, have, text messages come out and what have you.
yeah.
But he really was the one who was in the clear when it comes to Dominion, because he was the only one who said, I'll put you on as soon as you give me proof. And she never did.
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, like I'm glad to know the answer to all of this, because people, I mean, I think people had a lot of like big pharma conspiracy theories. Somebody had asked earlier, is it because he went too centrist? And
I think the other one that I could think of is so we know that like after January 6th, Rupert Murdoch, he was done with Trump. He was like, I'm done with you. And if you read the New York Post, that became immediately clear that the hand of God had come down and said, we're this is not our guy anymore. Move on. There was a lot of positive coverage of DeSantis, but he really was disgusted with that. And Tucker spent a lot of time questioning the evidence. I mean, that's not my issue. I don't know that I have a lot of sympathy for people who beat up cops or what have you. I wouldn't. I mean, but he saw that as a civil liberties issue, and he covered it a lot. And that people felt that was maybe another area where it was just going too far for the ownership. But to me, the Ukraine one, that seems to me like the most obvious explanation, and the one that really. It's both the most compelling explanation to me, but also the source of the biggest loss of his voice in the mainstream media, because nobody else will say what he said.
Yeah, right. So do you think that this is going to be a massive loss for Fox? I mean, it seems to me that if this sticks and Tucker and they don't, I don't know, decide to bring him back or something like that, and he gets to go independent or he goes with some other network. I saw that something that I'd never heard of before called Valuetainment TV offered him like $100 million deal. I clicked on the link. I was like, I still don't know what this is. I don't know why they have this much money when I've never heard of them before, but I'm sure there's an answer to that. I mean, I feel like, so many people were going to Fox because of Tucker. It just seems so unwise for them, but maybe I'm missing something.
It's a good question. Again, I can't predict. I don't know if they're gonna, some people say like, look, that's just the easiest time slot because it's when the most televisions are turned on in the country. But it's just a fact that a lot of those televisions used to be turned to CNN at 8 p.m. and now they were turned to Fox News. It depends really, I think, who they replace him with. If they replace him with someone who's a popular, look, these people act like they're such a cipher, the Trump voter, the Tucker watcher, like we know what these people want and who they are. Like they hate open borders. They are sick of mass immigration undercutting the wages of the working class, and they hate foreign wars. Like that's it. They hate trade, they hate foreign wars, and they hate, open borders. Like that's what got Trump elected. There's no magic here. They're liberals from 50 years ago. Like, they're people who are like working class, who have conservative social values and protectionist economic values. Like that's like, there's no mystery here. So, I mean, the question is who else in the mainstream is representing that person? And, Tucker was not afraid to speak for them. But these are the deplorables, right? The Republican elites hate them. The leftist elites hate them. I mean, there's just so much contempt for people who make their living with their hands. I've spent all week in California interviewing people who are janitors, who are cleaners, who are people who are small business owners who make their livings cleaning toilets, and they take so much pride in it. And it's just so humbling. I mean, it's so freaking humbling to like talk to these people. And the amount of disgust and contempt that people who work with their brains, who have the luxury of sitting in their pajamas and working on laptops from their homes
And working for an
have.
hour and a half a day before they go to frickin' yoga and then claiming about how much anxiety they have.
Exactly.
I can't buy a house. I'm so stressed out.
Exactly.
It's like, you're the most comfortable person in America.
It's
like,
just it's infuriating, and it's very hard for me to think of like who else has the respect for truck drivers and, you know, janitors and, you know, people who work the railroads, who also both parties have abandoned. You know, these people are like, nobody cares about us, nobody speaks to our issues, you know.
And everybody treats us like we're stupid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or bigots, right? Like if you're a person who's like,
racist,
I just want a fair shot at the American dream, and, you know, my daughter's really good at volleyball and I don't want a man punching her in the face. Like,
yeah, it's really amazing. Okay, we're at like 40 minutes now. I just want to remind people that if they do want to ask questions before we wrap up, we'll probably wrap up in about 20 minutes, so you still have a little bit of time. Please use the super chat to ask questions. I also wanted to ask you what you think is going on. I know you don't like predicting things, but what's going on with CNN? I mean, it's easy to say like Don Lemon was fired because he was too woke and because he was frankly an asshole. Like, I think people weren't enjoying watching him be so smug about his asshole opinions, but maybe you have a different perspective.
No, I mean, once the network allows people to spread the gossip to other websites, like they're doing with Tucker, like they did with Don Lemon, it's like it's over, right? So when the stuff started coming out about Don Lemon screaming at Caitlin Collins, that was the first. And when that hit the post, that I was like, oh wow, they're trying to fire him. Okay. CNN is it's so hard to see how they could right the boat. I mean, people have just lost so much respect for that network. And it's crazy because, you know, 15 years ago, they were, the biggest show in town. They had a huge working class audience, and they just squandered it by going woke. And,
and I feel like, sorry to interrupt, but I feel like, I mean, I'm not American and I didn't grow up watching American news or cable news at all, really. So I mean, the impression that I got sort of from afar at that time was that CNN was sort of looked down upon. Like, I think that CNN, at least I mean, Canadian progressives are so elitist and look down on Americans in general, which is ridiculous because I think America is a far better country than Canada these days. But I mean, they thought of CNN as like for the stupid
pedestrian
basic people.
Right, exactly. And I think that that's the problem. Again, it's kind of like what we started with, like the elites are not going to watch it because like they'd rather watch MSNBC where people are even more woke, so it feels more rarefied and it feels more like you need to be even more educated to watch this, right? And working class people aren't going to watch it because it insults their values. So who does that leave them? You know, they're not getting that like elite New York Times reader anymore, but they're also not going to get like normies, because normies are like done with this woke cult. They're done hearing the woke stuff on race, and they're done hearing the woke stuff on trans. Like they just don't buy it, and they're sick of being told that they're bad for, you know, believing what they believe, which they know is not bad. So they've sort of like painted themselves into a corner. And it's, you know, the way to right the boat, again, it's not rocket science, is debate. Like people want to see both sides represented in the same place. Like anybody who brings back Crossfire is going to clean up because people want to see that. That's why Bill Maher is doing so well, because he has people on who he doesn't agree with and he gives them a hard time and they give him a hard time back. And he has people who disagree with each other. And, you know, he's not afraid to make people uncomfortable. I mean, that's like real TV. People want to see that. And there's very little left. And I can tell you, like, I feel like I'll go on a show and if I know that the person agrees with me, like, you just get lazy. Like, you just get lazy. I was invited to participate in a panel. I won't say give a talk. I'm never going to be invited to give a talk at a university again, but I was invited to participate in a panel. And I said to the students, like, you need to become allergic to being in a space where everyone agrees with you. Like it should prickle the back of your neck if you're like, everyone in this room thinks the same thing, because you are losing IQ points when you only talk to people you agree with. You're getting stupid and lazy because no one is challenging you, and we all know this is true. Like you don't have to bring your A game. You just sit there and get lazy on your talking points and say what you know the person agrees with, and it's just a disaster.
Yeah. I mean, that was like one of the big reasons why I started moving away from like feminism and from writing about feminist stuff, because I started to feel intellectually bored and so not challenged. And I wasn't interested in everybody just being like, yeah, agree with you, you're so great. I'm like, I don't know, is what I'm saying true? Like, I wanted to be challenged, and I wanted people to challenge me, and I wanted to know if my ideas were good, and if they weren't good, I wanted to change my mind. But and I didn't like that culture of feminism wherein you only had panels. Every single event that I did when I was just doing kind of more, I guess, radical feminist kind of stuff, you would do an event and everybody in the room, on the panel and in the audience, would agree with you already. And I was like, what is the point of this? And when I suggested having somebody different, somebody who disagreed or had a different perspective, nobody wanted to do that. And it was like, why are we literally, what is the point of this? I don't understand.
Right. So you and I at some point have to debate about porn, because I don't think I don't think I'm on the same page as you about that.
That would be great. Then we should definitely do that. Okay, that'll be our next live stream.
Yes.
I guess so. Who is doing well?
Oh, well, there's I heard like called Newsweek.
Newsweek. Sorry. Okay, I'm glad to hear it. I mean, like I also just read, so not only like Buzzfeed, Vice, I don't know, CNN, and then Vox laid off a bunch of people.
Yeah.
I think there's a whole bunch of
the Insider.
Yeah. ESPN, News Corp. So who's doing? Okay, so Newsweek. Good. That's good. I'm glad. I mean, I don't know. I don't like big media. I don't like mainstream media. I like independence. Like, I like Substack. I feel like most of the information I get is from like podcasts from people that I trust, although most of those people came out of mainstream media and are like seasoned reporters and journalists. But yeah, I mean, I'm not the kind of person who's going to turn on like the mainstream news. I don't watch the news on TV. But I still want that to be there.
Right.
For other people.
See, I feel like it's so not important. Like, I just feel like the news is so not important.
But then what would people be like? Again, not for me, but I think that people want to know what's going on, but they don't want to know that much. They're not going to spend that much time on it. Maybe that's wrong.
The sort of these golden eras of American journalism, like the time we all are nostalgic for, right? When there was like 3 networks and everybody sat down and watched the same half hour of TV, which was really 22 minutes, right? Because they had to build in the commercial breaks, right? So everyone would sit down at 8 p.m. and watch like Walter Cronkite or whatnot, right? Like, that's the thing we're all jonesing for. I mean, 22 minutes of television, right? And let's say half of it was domestic and half of it was like, international, so we're talking about like 11 minutes of international news and 11 minutes of like, whatever made the national headlines that day. Like, I mean, is it really important that everybody have that? I don't think so.
No, I mean, yeah, you're right. I don't know that it's that important. I have no sense of what regular people want, although I suppose we talked about that earlier, which is like sort of dependent on the kind of work that you're doing. Whereas like, obviously people, they were wrong when they said that people had short attention spans because everybody's listening to 3 hours of Joe Rogan.
Right.
That's what they were saying for a long time, is that people only want clips and blips and everything has to be really exciting
Right.
and really fast. And that turned out not to be true. So I guess, my opinion is that the more diversity, the better. So I think that there could be and should be room for a mainstream media, I suppose, although that's not necessarily what I'm specifically invested in, because I'm more interested in the independents. But I just don't know if that's true for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, the more the better, the more the merrier. Like, somebody like Tim Pool shows up and starts talking about, stuff and people like it, that's great. Like, I just think,
That's a really apt summary. I can see you're a regular watcher.
No, I sometimes I get into a mood. I'm like, oh, let me check in on what Tim Pool has to say about this, because he is an independent thinker, and he's one of the few people, I have to say, like, I really admired how he his Kanye interview, because I think he knew that his audience was going to be on Kanye's side, and he didn't care, and he said he did the right thing, and he said, look, he asked him questions that were, I admired that. I think but that's a rare example. I think a lot of people would not take on their own audience in that way. When they're sort of based on subscriber based, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think people do appreciate that more than they admit to, though. You obviously hear from people who flounce. I hear from people who've flounced quite often, and they'll say, like, I don't like that you said this, or that you became an anti-vaxxer. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but you know what I mean. And I'm not paying attention to you anymore. But I think actually there's also the people who you say that you hear from who say, like, I don't really agree with everything you say, but I appreciate hearing from you anyway. And people will stick around for that. I think it's really a trust thing. I think it has something to do with integrity and trust.
And you hear a lot of people like complaining, like, oh, all you're getting is opinion these days because it's cheaper to produce opinion, and people don't want to go out and pay for the reporting, which is expensive, which I can tell you, as somebody's reporting about, it's extremely expensive. But the thing is, like, there's a lot of citizen journalism now. Like, there's just a lot of videos that people take of stuff that you would, like, for example, when they talk about the death of local news, like, it's so true. It's really a tragedy. There's no more local news. Local news was really important. However, when you have like an exciting school board hearing, which is one of the things that local news used to cover, like, all the parents are there with their cell phones. That all makes it, like, the parents who need to know, who are in the need to know, they find out. Like, people are extremely good at getting the information that they need. And, Christopher Lash, one of my favorites, he's this great saying where he's like, people are always complaining that, they say Americans are disengaged from politics because they're ignorant. And he's like, the exact opposite is true. They're ignorant because they are not included in politics. And he's like, people only go after information that is relevant to them. And he's like, have you ever been in the midst of an argument and there's like one piece of information that would prove you totally right and the other person totally wrong, and you will literally stay up all night and go to the ends of the earth to get that piece of information because it is relevant to you? But if you are not included in the conversation the way the working class is not, if you have been cut out of every position of influence and power in this country in the way that everybody who's in the bottom 90% has been, no information matters to you because it's not relevant to your life. So I sort of really hold by that. And I think that, in that sense, social media has been great because it has given people the information that they need. But people will find out what they need to know. A week before an election, people will go and like look at, okay, which is the person who's going to do the most for me. And usually what they'll find is nobody's going to do jack shit for them. And so they won't vote anyway. That's what's happened. Please excuse my language. I try not to swear, but that's really what ends up happening. And it's like, it's not because they're ignorant, it's because it's irrelevant to their lives.
Yeah. Okay. And actually we have some questions from viewers about the election. Megan wants to know who you like as president.
Who I like as president? I don't think you're supposed to like the president. I think all politicians have to be sociopaths. I haven't
Can you
made up my mind
imagine
yet.
wanting to be a politician?
No, I can't. It's like you have to be a total sociopath.
I would
Also, we don't know
never.
who's running. I mean, how could I choose
I
yet? I
know.
mean, I'm there's people I like, but like I don't agree with about anything. Like I think Tim Scott
In your
seems
dream
like a
world,
upstanding person. In my dream world, like who would it would be like I mean, I also like. I mean, I'm not. I'm totally getting canceled for saying this, but like the more I think about, the last 3 years compared to the 4 years that came before them, like, I mean, Trump's obviously a very flawed human, but more and more, I think that he was a very good president. I'm obviously
yeah.
not saying I would vote for him. I don't know. I really don't know. I could vote for, but I'm one of these people who could vote for a progressive. I could vote for Marianne Williamson, or I could vote for Trump. Like, I really don't know. And I'm really open to all of, I mean, I wonder how many people in America, probably a lot actually, but there's going to be a lot of like Marianne Williamson Trump people, just like there were a lot of Bernie Sanders Trump people. And I think I've sort of increasingly become part of that coalition.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the kind of person who's very attached to any one politician because I usually don't love any of them very much, and
Yeah.
I make my decisions nowadays. I mean, I used to be very attached to a party, but I make my decisions based on the people and what they're saying and how much they represent my interests. I guess Joe asks, regular folks are definitely ticked off by woke BS in female spaces and sports, but will the momentum from that outrage carry to the 2024 election?
I think there's a more important question, which is people are ticked off about that stuff, but they have pressing economic needs that are more important. I was talking to a Black woman today, very typical of conversations I have a lot with working class Black people. And she was telling me she hates how much welfare there is. She knows a ton of people who are scamming welfare. She thinks that government programs create dependency, and they get rid of the fire in your belly to be entrepreneurial and go out and make a life for yourself. She's very critical of the trans stuff, like very critical of wokeness in general. She thinks this is the land of opportunity. And I said, so which party do you vote for? And she was like, oh, only Democrats. And I was like, you sound like a Republican. Like everything you just said is Republican. And she's like, oh yeah, I would never vote for them though.
Why?
I know. So I'm like, tell me why, because I talk to Republicans about this all the time. Like, how are you not getting these votes? She's like, I know, I'm a conservative. Like on every issue, I'm a conservative, but I would never vote for those people.
But why does she hate the Republicans? Did she say?
She said she didn't have like a specific, she just felt they were the party of the rich and that they,
Okay.
they were the party of the, the elites, and that, she doesn't think the Democrats do much, and she doesn't agree with a lot of what they do. But, she was a person who had been on welfare for a few years to get herself out of poverty and into her next job. And I'm sure she has a lot of people who are like in her, who would become her dependents if their needs were not being met in a certain way. She wasn't clear on the answer to that. And so we laughed about it and we tried to get to the bottom of it for a long time, and we didn't. It wasn't a tribal thing. It was just,
how much do you think the abortion issue factors into these kinds of decisions? Like, it seems major from the outside.
You mean specifically in the Black community or more generally?
Just in general, like in general, in terms of how many people are choosing Democrat versus Republican or the other way around on account of the abortion issue, like whether or not they believe in, they're pro-life or pro-choice, I suppose we could call it.
Americans are not very divided on abortion. It's very interesting. Like neither party represents them on abortion. So 80% of Americans are in agreement on most of this issue. So they want abortion to be legal, but only in certain cases. So they want it to be legal for the first trimester and in cases of rape and incest and mother's health. But support for abortion after the first trimester just craters. And support for bans after 6 weeks is virtually non-existent. And support for a ban that would not have exceptions for rape and incest, really, like I'm talking less than 10% of Americans want that. So there's just huge consensus on abortion. The problem is that one party thinks it should be legal until like literally the day before the baby is due, and the other party thinks it should be illegal literally from the minute of like penetration. So, it's very complicated. If you have a Republican show up and say, I'm going to institute, a ban, a total ban, they're not going to do very well. If you have Democrats show up and say it has to be legal in all cases, they're not going to do very well. But if you line those two people up, they're going to go for the Democrat because it needs to be legal in certain cases, right? If you line up like a more reasonable Democrat with an extremist Republican, the Democrat's going to win. If you do so, it's a very, very complex issue, and it also depends what you're talking about. So Democratic women, especially educated white Democratic women, it matters a lot for them, even though these are never the people getting abortions. It's like they're all the people at the abortion rallies, and these women will never need an abortion. Like they're all just, it's very important to them. It turns out it's quite important to suburban women. So the swing voters, they really don't like these bans. And then I think it's just less of an issue for, the Black community is extremely ambivalent about abortion. It's a very religious, conservative community, but also a community that does take advantage of abortions. So it's complicated.
It's so interesting because the issues that are represented as the issues that matter the most and that the parties are using to galvanize support and voters are not really the issues that people care about. Like, I don't know if you saw that article. There was an article in the New York Times last month that said essentially that the trans debate blew up because the Republicans needed a new issue to galvanize their base around after same-sex marriage was won, which is not what happened in any way at all. No, but no. Like I was like, do you actually believe this? Like, right. As much as this is like a fiery debate, like you say, this isn't the key deciding factor for and most it's people, like, I don't think.
So talking to working class people, like they hate the trans stuff. Like they're very solidly on the side of the Republicans when it comes to the trans stuff. It is not their top voting issue. They have much more pressing concerns. Right. And they're insulted by the idea that they should sacrifice their pressing concerns on the altar of a thing that is the number one issue for rich conservatives, right? Like, so it's, it's not their number one concern. They agree with them, but give me something better. And the only person who was doing that for a long time was Trump.
Yeah, right. Peter asks, is Fox's firing of Tucker Carlson a manifestation of a mindset similar? I mean, I think we addressed this already a bit, but mindset similar to that of Budweiser's I'd rather go broke than not be woke that led to the hiring of Dylan Mulvaney to sell beer. I mean, I don't think they hired Dylan Mulvaney to sell beer, but they did use him in an ad, I guess. They used him to promote. I guess, I mean, what did you think about all that? Because I feel like they got a lot of flack online, but I wonder if it hurt their bottom line or helped their bottom line.
So just very briefly, because I do have to go, but
yeah,
I honestly think that was probably just an honest mistake that, like, they hired this woman to sort of rebrand Bud Light to get more customers. And she was like, oh, I know who we could appeal to, like totally misunderstanding like who their base is and who their drinker is. And so they ended up insulting them deeply. But I don't think it was like as consciously done. It's just what you do now if you're a corporation. So I think it was like, I totally understand why people got insulted by that, why they were like, I don't want a picture of this person in my house. Like, this is against all of my values. And they are like the Bud Light drinker. I mean, it's sort of like when Elon Musk started taking on the left, I was like, who do you think drives electric cars? Like, what are you doing? Right. So I do think it was kind of like an honest mistake, but a really stupid one. And
yeah, I mean, she must have just thought, hey, this guy gets a lot of traffic and he has a lot of followers, so let's use him, and didn't realize how much her customer base
Yeah,
hated this kind of
I
person.
find him very fascinating. And we'll talk about him next time because
Yeah.
I really do go back and forth on, I mean, first of all, I think the majority of his followers are conservatives who hate him. Like I don't think that there's a lot of like but do you watch the Blair White Project?
No. I mean, I know who Blair White is, but I've never actually watched.
She's very interesting on Dylan Mulvaney. Anyway, we'll talk about it
Okay.
next time when we talk about pornography and get into our heated debate about.
Yeah, let's do that. I think that sounds so fun.
Great.
Okay, thanks everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yeah, like and subscribe.
So
Megan
that
is
you
the
don't miss
best.
anything. I mean, I'm not the best, but I'm okay. Thanks. And thanks for coming, Batya. I so appreciate your time, and it was so fun
Thank
to
you
talk to you
so
again,
much.
and
It
I
was
can't wait to do
so
it
great
again.
talking to you. We'll talk
Okay.
soon. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Bye.